Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grayson. This is the KMG show for Monday, January the 11th, 2021. I'm going to have to remind you all of the rules. We all know about all of the accounts that have disappeared. I don't want my account to disappear. So just to be clear, Joe Biden was legitimately elected on November the 3rd of last year, and he will be inaugurated president on January the 20th of this year, which is in 9 days' time. Any claims to the contrary are conspiracy theories, misinformation, and if they appear in the chat, they will be purged. Someone said that my Twitter account was not working. Just let me check that, okay? Let me check that. See what we get when I look up my Twitter account in a private window. Just give me a second here. Is it coming up? Waiting for that. It's still coming up. So I don't know what is going on with that claim. Let's see. Sit rep here. So, last Monday's show lasted half an hour, or last Tuesday's or whatever. And so it was clear that further live streaming with the Wi-Fi from my hotel was not going to be possible. So I said I'd look into alternatives, and the alternative that I looked into was getting a regular ISP account in my hotel room. And I had taken the modem with me from Surrey to Victoria, and I called my ISP and a little back and forth, and they said it should work. Okay, so I bought a 25-foot coaxial cable and a cable splitter, and then I found out that at the back of the set-top box next to the TV, there was a cylindrical metal bracket that was shielding the coaxial cable from the terminal. What it meant was it couldn't be removed. It couldn't be pulled off. It couldn't be screwed off. And I went to the front desk and mentioned this, and there was some sort of talk of a cutting tool, perhaps, or a pair of pliers, and I was told that the manager of the hotel would deal with the situation for me the next day, and he never showed up. So I went to the hardware store and bought a rather complicated cutting tool, whereupon I discovered that stripping coaxial cable is a lot more difficult than, say, stripping speaker wire. And I fumbled around with this for quite some time. I had to remove my contact lenses because these are tiny little things you're dealing with there. And I managed to do a real half-ass job, and the cable was constantly slipping out. But further problem is that I didn't have an internet connection, so I called my ISP, and they said, "Oh, well, your account hasn't been transferred." And I said, "My account was transferred 2 days ago or so. I was told by one of your representatives." "No, that hasn't been done, but it won't take long, just a few minutes." But then you're supposed to get a white light on the top of the modem, and there wasn't. There was a blinking green light, and they told me that it would take 24 hours, up to 24 hours, for the situation to be resolved. That's why there wasn't a show on Friday. Well, it's all hooked up now, and I don't see any references to buffering. Before we get on to the main part of the show, I was walking in View Street, downtown Victoria, a few hours ago, and I saw a man walking down the street, passing me on the sidewalk, and he was wearing a mask outdoors because, of course, he is, because this is Victoria. despite the fact that only 11 people have died of causes attributed to COVID-19 on the whole island, which hosts about 800,000 people. Most of the people on the streets are wearing masks. But this was a little different. This was a little better because he had a dog on a leash, and it was a beagle, and it was still a puppy. And the beagle was wearing a mask. I'm not making this up. Oh, yes, many people have complained about losing Twitter followers since January the 6th. And I have lost somewhere between 400 and 500. I was about, 8,450. I'm now under 8,000. Many people have lost tens of thousands, over 100,000 Twitter followers. But yes, the purge continues. And how far it will go, I can't say. None of us can say. Let's just go back to the chat. A lot of people on the chat today. It's glad to see. Gaminion says, YT permanently banned me yesterday out of nowhere. I don't even make videos. I appealed and got immediately unbanned. It was jarring. I thought the FBI was coming for me or something. Chogokin permabanned from Twitter because of a comment about Mitch McConnell. Kathy Shadle, RIP. What is that a reference to? Is it a reference to medical condition, or is it merely a social media thing? Please answer if you know. Okay, Head McNeck says audio and video both flawless. I'm really pleased to hear that. Hauper says, I also salute our beautiful and beneficent, soon-to-be coronated new, I'll say President Biden. Indeed, as must we all. Yeah, what you're seeing here is a little different because my modem was in a sturdy box, which I put under the monitor, so the monitor was at eye level. Well, the box is no longer sturdy because I took the modem out of it. So I'm going to have to look and see whether I can find buy some sort of other cheap box to raise the monitor. But we are now back on the air, and that is all. That's all that counts for now. Okay, Alex DeLarge, thank you for your concern. Okay. KMG, this is a good time to get more moderators. Yaka Raipala, hello to our Finnish friend. Yes, video quality holding up for now. Contra Coup, I'm surprised that your cable modem worked when connected to hotel coax. You got very lucky. Most hotels use multiplexers for their guest TV, so no outside signal gets in. Steve says, and the beagle was wearing a mask. Sentences you will hear in 2021. Kathy Shadle died. Well, I'm sorry to hear that. I know she suffered from lupus for many years. I think it's fair to say that Kathy Shadle and I didn't get along very well. But I do sincerely regret her passage. Is that True Grit playing in the back? I think it's The Rifleman. It's on MeTV, which is the old man TV show, which I have on. Okay, let's talk about the first topic, which is what is truth? Asked jesting Pilot. But first, I will go to the Drudge Report, which is on fire, actually, literally. The graphic at the top is a picture of a MAGA hat on fire with an American flag behind it. It was the Red Hatters. Records show fervent Trump fans fueled U.S. Capitol takeover, homegrown fascism. 2 Capitol police officers suspended for alleged involvement, 10 to 15 under investigation. Raging collection of grievances, disillusionment. More sinister attack than first appeared. Pelosi says staff hid under table for hours. That is just appalling. Absolutely appalling. And I'm afraid anyone who takes any kind of joy in the discomfiture of Nancy Pelosi or any other Congress people or senators. That's just despicable, absolutely despicable. I mean, it can't be permitted. Approval level hits all-time low, 33%. 43% want Trump arrested, according to Rasmussen. DC Attorney General reportedly looking at charging President possible civil liability. Biden's still planning to be sworn in on steps. What is there going to be, 15,000 troops protecting him? Something like that. Plan to calm nation. America united. I don't know who's making that claim. Washington Monument closed due to threats. DC seeks to secure inauguration, 15,000 troops. Lockdown starts this week. FBI warns of armed protests in all 50 states. Potential boogaloo violence during January 17th rallies. I'm not sure I ever quite understood what boogaloo referred to. Melania lashes out at post-riot criticism. PGA championship pulled from Bedminster. House Dems on verge of sealing majority for impeachment. And the main big headlines, 216 hours left. FBI warns of huge uprising Wednesday, double impeachment, incitement of insurrection. Twitter doomed? Oh, why would Twitter be doomed? Yeah. So, hang on a second here. And, oh, yes. Let's get to the fact checkers. The fact checkers are our new overlords. But before I get into fact checking, I want to repeat a quotation that I've perhaps used on the show before. This is from Claude Coburn, the British political writer who was not a right-winger. He was very far from a right-winger, to be sure. And he said, "It is evident to any thinking person that there are no neutral facts waiting around to be picked up like pebbles on the beach." But apparently there are. Now, that the good people at USA Today and PolitiFact, they tell us, and Twitter tells us, quite rightly, what is true and what is false. And I'm rather expecting soon enough people who make religious tweets along the lines of Jesus is the Son of God, there will be a little Twitter clarification that this is an unproven claim. And indeed, the claim that God exists is unproven. So, from PolitiFact, quotes show Democrats supported riots when BLM was burning down cities and killing people in the streets. Mostly false. Let's find out why. After pro-Trump rioters stormed the U.S. Capitol January 6, some have taken to social media to criticize liberals who have condemned the breach, calling them hypocrites for supporting a Black Lives Matter protests over the summer. One popular Facebook post targets 4 Democratic women in Congress, U.S. Representatives Ayanna Pressley, Vice President-elect Kamala Harris, U.S. Representative Maxine Waters, and House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. Their faces are pictured in front of burning buildings. Each photo includes a quote purportedly from the lawmaker that sounds like she is encouraging unrest. The post claims these are direct quotes from when Black Lives Matter was burning down cities and killing people in the streets. The message isn't totally accurate. Some of the quotes are legitimate, but some are outdated and unrelated to the BLM protests, and others are taken out of context. The post was flagged as part of Facebook's efforts to combat false news and misinformation on its news feed. Read more about our partnership with Facebook. Let's take it one quote at a time. Ayanna Pressley. According to the post, Pressley, a Democrat from Massachusetts, said of BLM protests that, quote, there needs to be unrest in the streets, unquote. She did call for unrest in the streets in an August 15th interview with Tiffany Cross on MSNBC. Quote, this is as much about public outcry and organizing and mobilizing and applying pressure so that this GOP-led Senate and these governors that continue to carry water for this administration, putting the America's people in harm's way, turning a deaf ear to the needs of our families and communities, hold them accountable, make the phone calls, send the emails, show up. You know, there needs to be unrest in the streets for as long as there's unrest in our lives. Seems pretty straightforward to me, but it turns out I have apparently misconstrued what Representative Presley said. PolitiFact continues, Presley received swift backlash with critics accusing her of condoning lawlessness. Presley said she didn't expect that reaction. Quote, there are moments in real time when you're offering something on a stage, in a dais, in an interview, when you become aware I'm going to experience a lot of vitriol for this, she told USA Today, January 3rd. I have to say, for this particular moment, I had not anticipated that because it was a framing that I've used many times before. There was no indication Presley necessarily meant anything other than peaceful protest. Oh, most people would associate unrest with something else. Kamala Harris. The quote attributed to Harris, the protesters should not let up, is legitimate, but she was neither referring to riots nor condoning people burning down buildings. Speaking remotely to Late Show host Stephen Colbert in June of last year, Harris voiced support for the racial justice protests that were going on, but she didn't say she wanted riots to continue. This is what she said. This is a moment, I'm telling you, they're not going to stop, and everyone beware, because they're not going to stop before Election Day in November, and they're not going to stop after Election Day. And everyone should take note of that on both levels, that they're not going to let up, and they should not, and we should not. Unquote. Okay. So I see there's a clear distinction being made here between peaceful BLM protesters and people who were burning, looting, attacking police, and the like. Clearly, those people who were engaging in criminal behavior as part of BLM protests are not BLM supporters, perhaps members of Proud Boys or Boogaloo. Let's get to Maxine Waters, Democrat of California. Quote, if you see anybody from that cabinet in a restaurant, in a department store, at a gasoline station, you get out and create a crowd and you push back on them and you tell them they're not welcome anymore anywhere, unquote. Waters' comment came in 2018 in a Los Angeles rally after a Virginia restaurant owner refused to serve then White House Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders. It had nothing to do with the Black Lives Matter movement or riots. Waters urged attendees at the event to keep pushing back against members of the Trump administration with whom they disagreed. You think we're rallying now? You ain't seen nothing yet, Waters said. Already you have members of your cabinet that are being booed out of restaurants, protesters taking up at their house saying, no peace, no sleep. If you see anybody from that cabinet in a restaurant, in a department store, at a gasoline station, you get out and you create a crowd and you push back on them and you tell them they're not welcome anymore, anywhere, unquote. Seems pretty clear to me, but never mind. Let's get to Nancy Pelosi. Alleged riot quote, I just don't know why there aren't uprisings all over the country. Maybe there will be. It was said over 2 years ago about the Trump administration's policy of separating migrant children from their parents at the U.S.-Mexico border. You mean just like the Bush administration did and just like the Obama administration did? I just don't even know why there aren't uprisings all over the country. And maybe there will be when people realize that this is a policy that they defend. Uprising all over the country. Yes, so we see that this meme is, well, truly mostly false, taken out of context. Assault, such as preventing people from going to restaurants or whatever, I guess when it's directed against certain people, it's got nothing to do with Black Lives Matter. And legitimate, perhaps? Who knows? Who knows? But there's a word from the fact checkers. And, this is from the Washington Post today. Talk radio owner orders conservative hosts to temper election fraud rhetoric. This is from Paul Farhi. After months of stoking anger about alleged election fraud, one of America's largest talk radio companies has decided on an abrupt change of direction. Cumulus Media, which employs some of the most popular right-leaning talk radio hosts in the United States, has told its on-air personalities to stop suggesting that the election was stolen from President Donald Trump or else face termination. Cumulus executive issued the directive on Wednesday just as Congress met to certify Joe Biden's election victory, and an angry mob of Trump supporters marched on the Capitol, overwhelmed police, and briefly occupied the building, terrorized lawmakers, and leading to the deaths of 5 people. We need to help induce national calm now, Brian Phillips, executive VP of content for Cumulus, wrote in an internal memo. Cumulus and its program syndication arm, Westwood One, quote, will not tolerate any suggestion that the election has not ended. The election has been resolved, and there are no alternate acceptable paths. If you transgress this policy, you can expect to separate from the company immediately, unquote. Atlanta-based Cumulus owns 416 radio stations in 84 regions across the country. Rush Limbaugh not a part of this, but many other top talkers are. Okay, what's the latest on the impeachment? House pushes to impeach Trump after deadly Capitol riot. This is from Meg Wagner and 2 other people from CNN. House Majority Leader Hoyer tells caucus that impeachment vote will be Wednesday. Tomorrow, the House will vote at night on the measure offered by Representative Jamie Raskin, a Democrat from Maryland, to push Trump out via the 25th Amendment. According to details from Hoyer's office, the House Majority Leader told members on the call that they should plan to return to Washington tomorrow to consider Raskin's resolution with votes at 7:30 p.m. ET at the earliest. The House will then meet at 9 a.m. ET on Wednesday to consider the articles of impeachment. And we got a factual update from Twitter on this, and Twitter is, of course, our most authoritative source. Twitter tells us the difference between truth and lies, and I have to thank Jack Dorsey for teaching me the difference between right and wrong. He really is a titan of our age, a moral giant. This is from Twitter. House Democrats introduced an article of impeachment against President Trump on Monday, accusing him of inciting insurrection at the Capitol building January 6th. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell told GOP colleagues on Friday that the earliest a Senate trial could likely be held would be on January 19th, according to a memo obtained by several news outlets. The 19th, Senate trial. Have to be a pretty quick trial, I guess, unless they intend to impeach Trump after he has left office. Let's have another look at the chat here. Hikma Warrior says, remember to harden your browser. Avoid all a certain company beginning with G products. Glib Medley says, Trump might die of Twitter withdrawal. God forbid. Wallace Libertarian, Trump is only one of 10 politicians worth half a bucket in the whole of politics. Alex DeLarge says that Trump needs to be humiliated and buried as a politician. Well, that is the establishment view. No question about that. Yes, I use the famous line from the Manchurian Candidate myself late last week. Anran says Jack Dorsey is the kindest, bravest, warmest, most wonderful human being I've ever known in my life. KMG, why are you still making excuses for this pathetic loser? I don't think he's a pathetic loser. He's done more for the people of America than any president since God knows when. Chad Chadson, hello to our valiant moderator. Yes, Alex DeLarge despises Trump. I think we know that already. Okay. Oh, this is from Oliver Darcy of CNN Business. Right-wing media gathered the tinder. Trump just lit it on fire. President Trump's supporters were storming the U.S. Capitol, and Fox News anchor Martha McCallum could hardly contain her shock. I'm stunned by the images that we're seeing right now, she said on the network's air. It was a jarring scene, but no one should have been terribly surprised, particularly not anyone working at Fox. The disturbing scenes that played out on national television Wednesday were a natural consequence of the lies and conspiracy theories about the presidential election that have for weeks now been fed to Trump's supporters. Experts had warned that disinformation about the election results could lead to real-world violence, But many in right-wing media did not heed those warnings, and Fox News, McCallum's employer, was chief among them. Fox News hosts, along with a cohort of propagandists on smaller right-wing cable networks, talk radio, and online platforms, have shamelessly lied to their supporters and undermined the American electoral system. Well, we know that there's no such thing as a conspiracy theory. That's what we're told. Here's one for you. President Woodrow Wilson, in his second term, suffered a debilitating stroke, and the president of the United States for about the last year and a half of the second Wilson administration was his wife, Edith, which was kept secret from the people of America. How about that one? When Claire Booth Luce, during the 1944 election, claimed that President Roosevelt was dying, she was excoriated as a conspiracy theorist, or whatever the term was then. Of course, she was absolutely right. Roosevelt managed to make it, until March of 1945? And if you see him, say, at the Tehran conference, he looks like a ghost. Of course, there's also weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, when the New York Times and all of the bestest people told us was absolutely true. Take it to the bank. Turned out that it wasn't true. It led to an invasion of Iraq, a disastrous invasion of Iraq. But again, there's no such thing as conspiracies. Conspiracies don't exist. Who else got purged? This is from The Wrap, and I must say that I'd never heard of this young man until January 9th. Ariel Pink has been dropped by his record label, Mexican Summer, following his attendance at Wednesday's rally at the White House in support of President Donald Trump, which led to the riot at the Capitol that has left 5 dead. Due to recent events, Mexican Summer and its staff have decided to end our working relationship with Ariel Rosenberg, a.k.a. Ariel Pink, moving forward, the label tweeted Friday. After he and fellow indie musician John Mausberg were spotted at the D.C. rally and photos circulating on social media, Pink said he did attend the event at the White House, but denied having joined the MAGA crowd who stormed the Capitol. I was in D.C. to peacefully show my support for the president, Pink tweeted Thursday, in response to a user calling out his participation in the event. I attended the rally on the White House lawn and went back to a hotel and took a nap. Case closed. Well, as we have learned, support for President Trump is actually itself evidence of terrorism. And one gets a feeling of Paris after the liberation in World War II? A lot of scores being settled. William Briggs writes today, it won't surprise you to hear that the bad guys at Dominion are coming after Sidney Powell to the tune of $1.3 billion. That's a B, friends. Sane. They may have well used a T. Did Dominion think that Powell was as rich as their oligarchic cheerleaders? The intent of the suit is not, as they said, to recover their reputation, which is, if anything, even solider with our rulers. Would any ruler want to go into a hotly contested election without the benefit of electronic voting anymore? If anything, Dominion ought to pay Powell for the free advertising. Powell will be broken. That is, the ruling class will try to destroy her to the best of their abilities, which are rather weak. But what they lack in intelligence, they gain in numbers and infinite resources. Pray for her. And if it comes to her asking for monetary support, please give if you can. The election is already broken. Some of us, poor Lynn Wood, cracked under the strain. I doubt they'll go after him because he's doing a better job on himself than they ever could. And they'll use him to say that the rest of us are just like him or worse. Pray for him as well. William Briggs recounts that the most hilarious thing that happened so far was that the dean of research at Cornell Medical School, where I was once a professor of biostatistics, emailed to say I had better not dare to use a Cornell affiliation. I told him that I would be horrified to have anyone think that I had any ties to Cornell, and that he should write anybody who thought so copying me so that I could endorse his repudiation. He hasn't written back since. The worst that will happen to me, I'm guessing, will be me overhearing on the phone people in the distance saying, tell him I'm not here. This is to my advantage because I'm lazy and didn't like working anyway. On the other hand, there are many other names higher up than mine who are involved in the suits who are feeling pain already, and you know what rolls downhill. I don't want to give any details, but jobs have already been lost and worse. People have been asked to publicly repudiate Trump, and John Brennan, former head of the CIA, has called for, in effect, Mao-era struggle sessions, that anyone who supported Trump must be forced to confess their sins in public, presumably, or else. William Briggs continues, this is why times of great difficulty bring out good. We will soon see who our true friends are and what people are made of. The Trump years and the election are going to cost a lot of us. The ruling class is out for revenge, not for anything we did or Trump did, not per se, but for not allowing them to be seen to be in charge. The debates are and have been, even during Trump's tenure, everywhere in charge. The left is everywhere triumphant. There is no major organization they do not control. Stuart Stevens tweets, at Project Lincoln, we are constructing a database of Trump officials and staff that will detail their roles in the Trump administration, track where they are now. No personal info, only professional, but they will be held accountable and not allowed to pretend they were not involved. This is in response to Andrew Feinberg. And who's he when he's at home? Whoa, Forbes chief content officer warns against hiring a Kayleigh McEnany or any prominent Trump flags. Quote, hire any of Trump's fellow fabulous above, and Forbes will assume that everything your company or firm talks about is a lie, unquote. I responded here, William Briggs says, put me on your list, you pansy assholes. A bunch of bloated, soy-faced effeminates and worse trying to sound tough. I don't mean that their list won't have an effect and that people on the list won't be hurt. I mean that each of these squishy little freaks is a coward hiding behind a bully. Fear and lust are also responsible for headlines like this. Cori Bush introduces legislation to sanction, remove all House members who supported election challenges, because we all know criticizing government is un-American and must be outlawed. Big tech agrees. So what can you do? Support those on the based right. The best way to do this is to keep in touch, to read what they write and heed what they say. Pray for all of us. Briggs concludes, you can help me by subscribing, if you haven't already, by entering your email. Yeah. Oh, it says more fact checking. You may have seen the meme showing President Bill Clinton and then Senator Joe Biden rocking a mullet, and I mean rocking a mullet. This is no quasi mullet. This is the full deal. And it goes something like this. Pick someone who looks at you like Clinton looks at Biden after the passage of the bill which began the mass incarceration of Black people in the United States. Well, this is false. Oh, did this bill in the 1990s lead to many, many, many more Black people in prison than previously? Yes, of course it did. But you see that Black people had been jailed disproportionately before Biden's bill. So you see that the whole thing is just a tissue of lies. Tissue of lies. Parler has now been booted by Amazon, Apple, and Google. This is from CNN Business. Brian Fung. Parler, the alternative social media platform favored by conservatives, now finds itself virtually homeless on the internet as Amazon, Apple, and Google have all booted it from their platforms in a span of little more than 24 hours. Amazon said it would remove Parler from its cloud hosting service, Amazon Web Services, Sunday evening, effectively kicking it off the public internet after mounting pressure from the public and Amazon employees. The decision, which went into force Sunday at 11:59 Pacific time, will shut down Parler's website and app until it can find a new hosting provider. The Parler website was not accessible earlier on Monday. Well, yeah, they did go to Amazon. Daniel Greenfield writes at Front Page Mag, back when Parler was taking off, I warned that its app-based dependency meant the two companies, Apple and Google, can eliminate it anytime they like. It was only a matter of time. The transition from desktops and laptops to Android and iOS devices means that users are operating in a walled garden run by two very lefty companies. Those companies can do with the garden what they please. Those users who choose to jailbreak their devices have more options, but most don't. Conservatives can try to distribute the knowledge more widely and encourage that kind of self-empowerment. Don't call yourself a conservative. Daniel Greenfield, you're much better than that. But the bottom line is that most smartphones, Kindle, Chromebook, etc. users want a simple device that just works and runs all the apps in the App Store. Doing anything more complicated would be inconvenient. People also tend to get their smartphones from one of the handful of remaining providers, e.g. the big three, AT&T, Verizon, and T-Mobile. You may think you're not using one of those companies, but even then you're probably using one of their branded providers on a small company that's using their services. That means 5 companies essentially control the mobile ecosystem and can shut down an app like Parler anytime they please. They can also, if they please, shut down access to any site accessed through their browsers. They can also ban any browser from their app store or device that doesn't shut down access to these sites. There are potential workarounds, but they all involve escalating levels of difficulty. And since the trend has moved away from any kind of independent user agency and toward crippled smart devices, that's the battle going forward. Don't get the idea that desktops and laptops are safe. Microsoft is evolving toward a walled garden of apps. And he continues, yes, someone asked, was it Scott Greer asked, what are the Republicans going to campaign on now? And I responded with my prediction. One, it's not censorship if private entities do it. 2, it's not socialism if a handful of companies controls everything. And 3, we love Israel. I think that's going to be the GOP going forward. It's possible that let's say the weak sisters there are going to be purged in primary campaigns. This is a really remarkable story. Of course, Trump was banned from Twitter, so he shifted to his @POTUS account, which is the official Twitter account of the President of the United States, and he was banned from that as well. Why? Well, they gave reasons. Normally, Twitter does not, but one of the reasons that it gave was that Trump used the phrase American patriots. And Twitter seriously argued that use of the phrase American patriots was an incitement to violence. But wait, there's more. This is from Lucas Nolan at Breitbart. Online payment processing service Stripe has reportedly cut all ties with President Trump's campaign and shut down the campaign's payment processing services. This prevents the Trump campaign from accepting donations by credit card. The Wall Street Journal reports that that Stripe will no longer process payments for Trump following last week's events at the Capitol. A financial tech company handles credit card payments for millions of online business and e-commerce platforms. President Trump's campaign used the service for processing donations to the campaign. Stripe is a private company valued at $36 billion, founded by brothers Patrick and John Collison, who remain citizens of Ireland. Stripe alleges that President Trump violated the company's policies against encouraging violence following his reaction events at Capitol Hill. In 2018, the company shut down the account of social media Gab after the corporate media reported that a gunman who killed 11 people in an attack on a Pittsburgh synagogue had posted anti-Semitic content to the platform. I'm sure many of you had a similar experience, that for many, many weeks, I was getting somewhere between 10 to 15 emails a day from Trump-related, official Trump-related entities. And last week they stopped. And apparently their email dissemination company has cut ties with the President of the United States. Where is the President of the United States? That's an interesting question. He has a Gab account, but hasn't posted to it for what, 3 or 4 days? Really remarkable times that we're living in. I'm going to talk about what Jim Kunstler has to say, and Jim Kunstler is not blackpilling. But first, let's talk about the Lincoln Project. The Lincoln Project, suspension of habeas corpus, the arresting of reporters, the federalization of cities like Baltimore, the attempt to arrest Justice Roger Taney of the Supreme Court, and much, much more. This is the man that they venerate as they denounce Trump as a fascist dictator. Scott Stedman, investigative journalist and author. Oh, he lists his pronouns. He's the founder of Forensic News Net. He tweeted 2 days ago, "I don't want to feed into Don Jr.'s nonsense, but I do want to tell a story. I followed John Weaver when I started my Twitter account. We exchanged messages. I sent him my stories, chatted about Russia, etc. He wrote a blurb for my book. He offered me some sort of joint venture, which I wasn't interested in, so I didn't respond to his calls. One day he DM'd me and said he had advice. He then proceeded to tell me how hot I looked and commented on my profile picture and my hair. He started calling me my boy. I found it deeply uncomfortable. Though we continued to DM every once in a while, the situation left me feeling quite uncomfortable. I brushed it off as one tends to do. I'm telling this story because I know there are more people who endured this kind of grooming with many more explicit details. As the Lincoln Project continues to grow financially, I felt compelled to share." Of course, what he said to me pales in comparison to others with whom Weaver communicated and countless others who've experienced much worse from people in power. The goal here is to hopefully provide some cover for others who are disturbed by Weaver's advances and might want to speak out. And hopefully the Lincoln Project does something. Oh, is this, "Hey Scott, advice. Can I give you some? Your new hair color is hot. Keep it that way. Of course, look, smart, clever, handsome, hot. You have it all." I don't know. Is this homophobia? I mean, we've learned in recent years just how essential the support of alphabet people is to the true conservatives. A great many true conservatives are alphabet people. And I think to point this out in any way, it's problematic at best and homophobic at worst. Okay, let's get to Jim Kunstler's column. Insurrection versus insurrection, he writes today. In the dark hours of Sunday, the big tech government allowance showed its hand in its massive purge of the public square, which is what social media became in a nation of strip malls, parking lots, and nonstop propaganda, shutting down all voices countering the constructed narrative du jour that the Democratic Party stands for defending Americans' liberty against a rogue president. There have been many shots fired so far to kick off a civil war, but that action was an artillery blast. Remember, the left's playbook is to accuse their opposition of doing exactly what they are doing. And so, of course, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has launched a last-minute impeachment on grounds of the president inciting insurrection. By a strange coincidence, reports on as-yet still live web channels say that the president actually invoked the Insurrection Act against seditionists in our government. If it is true, and I can't confirm it, then the nation has blundered into an epic political battle. Some facts may suggest the truth of the situation. The Washington, D.C. airspace was shut down for hours on Sunday afternoon, and 6,000 National Guard troops have been moved into the District of Columbia, as well as other cities controlled by the Democrats with Antifa/BLM mobs at their disposal. What does that signify? The news media couldn't be troubled to find out. Trump is reported to be in a safe location. As of last week, that was Dyess Air Force Base outside Abilene, Texas. Maybe he is somewhere else now. The New York Times, Washington Post, and CNN would like you to think that Trump has been pounded down a rat hole. Oh, that's one possibility. Another possibility is the Democratic Party is unnerved and desperate about what's liable to come down on them in the days ahead. Trump is still president. You probably noticed he has been president for 4 years to date, which ought to suggest that he holds a great deal of accumulated information about the seditionists who have been playing games with him throughout all those years. So 2 questions might be, how much of that information describes criminal acts by his adversaries? Yes, and what's within the president's power to do something about it? I guess we'll find out. Or stated a little differently, it is impossible that the president does not have barge loads of information about the people who strove mightily to take him down for 4 years. At least 2 pillars of the intel community, the CIA and the FBI, have been actively and visibly working to undermine and gaslight him. But you can be sure that the president knows where the gas has been coming from. By its work this weekend, starring Jack Dorsey of Twitter, Zuck of Facebook, Tim Cook of Apple, and Jeff Bezos, Amazon, and the Washington Post, you know exactly what you would be getting with La Résistance taking power in the White House and Congress unvarnished tyranny. No free speech for you. Joe Biden, there's a charismatic, charming, dynamic, in-charge guy. He's already doing such a swell job healing America. For instance, his declaration Tuesday to give $30 billion to businesses run by, quote, Black, brown, and Native American entrepreneurs, unquote. White folks need not apply, since when are federal disbursements explicitly race-based? What and who exactly comprised the committee set up to operate Joe Biden, the hypothetical holographic president? Surely you don't believe he's spirit cooking this sort of economic policy on his own down in the fabled basement. And so here we stand at the start. Jim Kunstler concludes of what's liable to be a fateful week for the United States. There's a lot of chatter on the lockdown that the current president is about to take. The president appears to understand his duty to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. He had plenty of opportunity to be a quitter from 2017 to 2021, and he's hung in there against every cockamamie operation the deep state threw at him. Odds are he is not quitting now. Okay, let's see. What else do we have in the chat? Bob Paxson says, it warms my heart to have all those Leafs caring about my country's politics. Well, as America goes, so goes the world. And I'll have more to say on the Leafs in just a few minutes. Contra says there's not an insignificant chance that Trump has been detained / neutralized. His denouncement video honestly looks and sounds like a deep fake. I've seen that claim made many times. Palcazo88 says Fox Day has been binging on crack for the last few weeks. How would Trump get this information out? Well, there's been a lot of talk about the emergency broadcasting system in recent days. Alex DeLarge, Kunstler is a crank. I don't think he is a crank. I think he is one of the most sensible, intelligent, and insightful men in the United States. Oh, okay. Should have kept Steve Bannon as he understood the big tech problem. We still don't know why Trump fired him, says Jules Roy. I don't know. Perhaps claiming far more credit than he deserved for Trump's victory. We know that Trump doesn't like that sort of thing. Gab has been having traffic-related issues, says Alex DeLarge. Yeah, I'm not surprised because apparently their membership has exploded in recent days. Chococan 666 Kiwi Farms has been offline for days now. Metal Mike says, behind the Iron Curtain, the government could deprive you from using the Postal Service, having a telephone, having access to print shop, to print flyers. You know, many of these dissidents ended up getting custodial jobs, you know, in the Eastern Bloc. But I think that would, I think Trump's opponents would consider that to be too generous by half. Thomas Brewer, truth is truth, though never so did, and time cannot make false that which was once true. Edward de Vere. Oh, okay. So, moving on, I am going to talk about Vox Day, despite the mockery directed at him. And first we'll go to Ace of Spades. Chinese democracy, Marxist corporatist fusion regime declares war on American Republic, and the neocon corporate courtiers applaud. Yeah. Remember not just who's doing this, but who enabled it, who encouraged it, and who is currently justifying it. That's right. Your true conservative tribunes of the people. Just so. The people who you've supported for years, donating each time they rattled their cyber beggars cup. The people you thought you were supporting to bring the complaints of those outside the DC power elite to the DC power elite, informing the DC power elite of the ways in which we were dissatisfied them and the changes we wanted the DC power elite to make as a corrective. Ace of Spades continues, but who instead, the whole while they were delivering the complaints of the DC power elite to the hinterlands, informing the outside the Beltway suckers and yahoos of the ways in which we were dissatisfying the DC power elite, and telling us the changes after the DC power elite demanded we make a corrective. Who was affected by the Cumulus media crackdown? Well, among others, Mark Levin, Ben Shapiro, and Dan Bongino. Long live the Marxist corporatist fusion regime, says Ace of Spades. You know what I feel bad about? That in my many years as a Republican, we just didn't do enough favors for the fascist corporations and ruling class CEOs who would issue hunting licenses to chase us down. Yeah, and apparently Fox is feeling the bite from being abandoned by millions of people who are not going to forget their early call for Arizona. Martha McCallum is being replaced with an opinion host. Supposedly she's not opinion, partly because Newsmax's Greg Kelly delivered the first Newsmax victory over Martha McCallum. Remember back in 2000, CBS News and other left-wing networks called Florida early for Gore, calling it wrong, and when tens of thousands of panhandle voters still had yet to vote. Did that happen? I suspect that's going to be determined to be misinformation, conspiracy theory. Now, this is actually true. A tweet from the U.S. State Department, curiouser and curiouser, that Trump's reign as president ended today, 1948-42. Sources tell BuzzFeed News a disgruntled staffer is behind the State Department's cites change of Trump and Pence's biographies. President Trump is scheduled to speak at the Alamo tomorrow, and I don't think I need to explain to viewers and listeners the significance of the Alamo to American history. Let's see, what else does Vox Day have to say? I'm going to have to be very careful. The silence of the cucks, he writes. They took the enemy's silver, now they have been given their marching orders, shed no tears from them, and note for future reference that the littlest chicken hawk, that is Ben Shapiro, and I'm not going to repeat what he has to say about that. I see Owen Benjamin, and I'm not a fan of Owen Benjamin's, that his DLive channel has been restricted. Using Parler was a massive, massive mistake, Vox Day claims. When are conservatives going to learn to stop trusting their gatekeepers? Handing over your telephone and driver's license to someone who can't protect your data just because they let you use their site for free is sure idiocy. He concludes, and why is breaking yourself of your addiction to the cult of free vital? Due to their business model, sooner or later, they're going to need to sell your data. That's why they hold on to it, even when they claim to respect your data privacy. If they actually did, they wouldn't hold on to it in the first place. Vox Day asks, Nancy Pelosi sure seems to be A, scared, and B, in an awful hurry. I wonder what has her in such a tizzy. Oh, yes, she invoked God. Yes, she invoked God. The same God who smiles, presumably, at the abortion of babies and the sexual mutilation of adolescents. I don't think that's the Christian God, but perhaps there have been recent developments in theology that I am unaware of. Let's talk about the Leafs now. Here's the situation in the Canadian media. There is no dissent allowed in the Canadian media. None. No, newt, nada. Doesn't exist. It was about 3 years ago that Ezra Levant, a man with whom I am not friendly, to say the least, was unpersoned. It took about a week. It took about a week. For what? About 20 years or more, Ezra Levant was regarded rather humorously as a crank figure, and very much ambitious, prone to hyperbole. And then within about a week, he was just erased. And then the hunt began for anyone who'd ever been associated with him or Rebel Media. And it was clear by that time that to continue to hold any kind of post in the Canadian media, one must march in lockstep with the narrative. So Canadian Conservatives, and I'll have a little bit more to say about Canadian Conservatives in just a minute. What are they left supporting? Because they haven't conserved anything. They never tried to conserve anything. I guess they've got Free Enterprise and Israel. It's not a very broad platform, is it? In any event, John Ibbotson says it's absurd to conflate support for Tories with white nationalism, but Liberals will try. You see the subtlety there? You see the triangulation? Oh, no. Aaron O'Toole, not a white nationalist, but I'm just going to insinuate that idea in your head for my own protection. Ibbotson begins, the Trudeau government is investigating whether the extreme right-wing group, the Proud Boys, should be declared a terrorist organization. That is a legal decision. Actually, it's a political decision, but never mind that. But there's politics in it as well. The Liberals are trying to discomfort Aaron O'Toole's Conservatives by linking the party to extremists. On the Proud Boys, officials will be analyzing useful intelligence and evidence as that comes forward. Mary Liz Power, Press Secretary to Public Safety Minister Bill Blair, said in a statement on Sunday. Oh, Bill Blair! Yeah, when they had the G20 meeting in Toronto, what was that, like 10 years ago? The Canadian government spent $2 billion on security for a useless meeting that doesn't accomplish anything. All the decisions are made quite some time before the Panjandrums get together, because obviously when you have so many countries involved, it would be impossible over the course of a couple of days to thrash out something. So it's a photo op, and they wear stupid national costumes. What happened in Toronto during the G20 was that the anarchists showed up and they started smashing up Starbucks and the like, as is their wont, and the police sat on their hands. Later, when people tried to walk to their homes in Toronto, suddenly the police had become real tough guys. Who are you? Can you prove it? Where are you going? Why? The same thing happened in 1997 in Seattle, the World Trade Organization protests. That Black Bloc or whoever went berserk downtown, smashing up Starbucks and other places, and the police sat on their hands. Later, when people who worked in downtown Seattle were trying to get home, suddenly the police had become real tough guys. Who are you? Can you prove it? Where are you going? Why? Yeah. Jagmeet Singh, the leader of the NDP, isn't prepared to wait. The Proud Boys helped execute Wednesday's attack on Capitol Hill, the NDP leader tweeted Thursday. Their founder is Canadian. They operate in Canada right now, and I'm calling for them to be designated as a terrorist organization immediately. Ibbotson comments, it will surprise no one if investigations into the attack on the Capitol building last week conclude that the Proud Boys were among the main culprits. But prominent Liberals aren't waiting for official reports or arrest warrants. They know that most Canadians despised U.S. President Donald Trump even before he incited the mob that attacked Congress. I've been shocked at the admiring words about Trump and Trumpism that I've personally witnessed, usually off the record from members of Canada's conservative establishment. Peter Donolo wrote in an op-ed that appeared Saturday in the Toronto Star. Donolo was a senior aide to former Liberal Prime Minister Jean Chrétien and former Liberal leader Michael Ignatieff. So, in other words, he doesn't have a vested interest in this. Liberal MP Mark Gerritsen claimed O'Toole and other senior conservatives has accounts on Parler, where extreme right-wing figures migrated after Twitter banned Trump and others who incite violence. Maybe it's time to delete your Parler accounts, Gerritsen tweeted. The O'Toole account is fake. Melanie Paradis, O'Toole's director of communications, messaged me. Other accounts were either created as placeholders to prevent fake accounts or were created before Parler became associated with extremist speech. Now, here's where it gets good. Anyone who knows O'Toole knows he has no truck with the radical right. Conservatives support the listing of various white supremacist groups as terrorist organizations, the conservative leader declared in a statement released Sunday. So he is well and truly neutered. But does the neutering go far enough? Should Aaron O'Toole be allowed to exist? And Ibbotson considers this. He writes, the Tories have a political problem that the Grits are happy to exploit, although it's ludicrous to conflate support for the Conservative Party with support for white nationalism or any other form of racism. Note that white supremacy, white nationalism, they're never defined in these stories. Let's not forget that more people voted Conservative in the previous election than for any other political party. Yeah, that's pretty worrying, isn't it? There are Canadians who support Trump, and some of them also support the Conservatives. Elections are won or lost in Canada in the swath of suburban ridings surrounding Toronto. These ridings contain large numbers of immigrant votes. The Liberals know that if they can plant the notion in people's minds that the Conservatives are racially intolerant, the voters will reject the party. The Liberal Party and the NDP have been saying little else about the Conservative Party for a long time. But Ibbotson suggests that this would be a new campaign. O'Toole condemns right-wing extremism, supports a robust immigration policy, defends the rights of alphabet people, Canadians, and other minorities, but he also at times makes poor choices. Slogans such as "Take Back Canada" are a gift to those who seek to portray Conservatives as intolerant. Who would he take it from? There's a photo that shows Deputy Leader Candice Bergen wearing a Trump MAGA hat floating around on social media. Paradis said that someone handed Bergen the hat and asked for a photo at an event a few years ago. It's not her hat, but the photo doesn't do the Tories any favors. Yeah. You see, he just doesn't go far enough. Doesn't go far enough. What more can Aaron O'Toole do? I'm sure they're figuring it out right now. Perhaps he could, adopt a gay Iranian refugee or something like that, or announce that one of his children is gay or one of his children is trans. That might help, but clearly more effort is needed on his behalf. Faith Goldie responded to Ibbotson's article. 1, Aaron O'Toole is claiming his Parler account was fake because of idiot journos. 2, the author admits immigrants are how parties win elections, and the only way to unite them is a common enemy, Canada's old stock. People who've studied political science or read about American history might have heard of a famous and very influential essay, later book, by Richard Hofstadter called The Paranoid Style in American Politics, first published in November 1964. I'm going to read from the Wikipedia description of it. In developing the subject, Hofstadter initially establishes that his use of the phrase paranoid style was a borrowing from the clinical psychiatric term paranoid to describe a political personality, and acknowledges that the term is pejorative. Psychological projection is essential to the paranoid style of U.S. Politics. Let's see, another aspect of Hofstadter's thesis that has been challenged by Samuel DeCanio's 2013 article, Populism, Paranoia, and the Politics of Free Silver, argues that instead of being a paranoid delusion, the populist position regarding bankers' use of bribes to influence 19th century monetary policy was largely correct. DeCanio offers evidence that the Coinage Act of 1873, legislation that eliminated bimetallism, and which the populists denounced as the crime of 73, was influenced by bribes that William Ralston, president of the Bank of California, paid to Henry Lindemann, director of the Philadelphia Mint. DeCanio's article includes a copy of the actual check Ralston used to pay Lindemann, indicating the populist claims were far more accurate than Hofstadter ever suspected. A 2020 study claimed that President Donald Trump used the paranoid style described by Hofstadter substantially more than his post-World War II predecessors. In brief, Hofstadter's argument, which has been largely, overwhelmingly, almost completely adopted by the left, is that anyone who disagrees with them is insane, mentally ill, certifiable, one might say. But again, if you want to have an academic career in my country, if you want to appear in the media to any extent, you must walk a very careful line. In fact, it's worse than that. You must shout louder than the left. There is a website called The Dominion, referring to the Dominion of Canada, run by a young man called Ben Wolfenden. Reject the paranoid style of politics. Now, this fellow is was a PhD candidate in political science or some such. He knows about Hofstadter. He knows what the paranoid style is. Again, everyone who disagrees with me is insane, clinically so. Wolfenden begins, I was halfway finished a different newsletter for this week on something that I'd been planning for a while, but events last week made me change my plans. That can wait. Donald Trump, President of the United States, the leader, scarecrow, so the free world, went to a rally of his supporters and repeated to them lies about a stolen election. He told his supporters to march on Capitol Hill. He incited an insurrectionist mob that stormed Capitol Hill, delayed the certification of the election outcome, vandalized the seat of American democracy, and abetted the death of 6 people, including 2 police officers and a young woman. Trump's behavior was supported and encouraged by spineless and conniving Republican senators and congressmen who gave oxygen to Trump, the mob, and the notion that Congress could or should overturn the will of voters. I admit to being genuinely shook by what happened. I don't fixate on American stuff, and I sometimes get accused of naively just wanting to ignore America. I don't. What I want people to do is to try and consciously treat America as a foreign country and treat its politics as such and not turn their own politics into American proxy wars. Too late for that, Mr. Wolfenden. America is still the global hegemon, and those of us in the English-speaking world in particular cannot escape our status as peripheral provinces of the American empire, which seems to completely contradict what he began the paragraph with, but never mind. And this essay goes on for thousands of words, yes, and he quotes Hofstadter. Now, Hofstadter wrote this in response to the candidacy of Barry Goldwater. And there was a famous incident in the 1964 election where a man called Ralph Ginsberg had a magazine, what was it called, Fact or something like that, True, but he interviewed a bunch of psychiatrists who said that Barry Goldwater was mentally ill, which led to, I believe, the American Psychiatric Association issuing a ukase saying that you can't do this anymore. You cannot, as a psychiatrist, claim that someone is mentally ill unless you have actually interviewed them. But of course, this again didn't stop Richard Hofstadter, who was one of the most honored academicians of his generation, writing a book, an essay first in Harper's and then a book, that everyone who disagrees with people like me is mentally ill. Sane washing the Great Reset. Now, I've already described, and you've heard me say that if you go to the World Economic Forum site, you will find an essay by a Danish parliamentarian talking about the wonderful world of 2030 in which property doesn't exist. No one owns anything. Oh, and there's no privacy, and these are good things. Now, if these people can get away with whitewashing the World Economic Forum and its sinister plan for us, I guess they are capable of anything. And, the people who are protesting masks, protesting social distancing, protesting presumably the martial law that has been declared in Quebec. But don't worry about them. Don't use that phrase martial law, because it's not really martial law. Some big-time leftist on Canadian Twitter said, well, anyone who's lived through martial law would know that, I did live through martial law in 1970. Passage of the War Measures Act. 2 people in Quebec were kidnapped. 2 and the country was put under martial law. Hundreds of people were arrested and held for up to 6 months with no habeas corpus, including journalism. So Canadians have recent experience with martial law. Let's see, Kathleen McLeod, MP, had tweeted in the last few days, my constituency office has been broken into and rifled through. It has been suggested I am a Nazi-like collaborator because I believe COVID is serious and support vaccines. Not a U.S.-scale polarization, but we do have issues. Well, obviously, if you're not, volunteering to get vaccinated, then you're paranoid. You're mentally ill. Oh, and let's get back to Erin O'Toole. Wolfenden writes, if we don't do our own gatekeeping and police our own, you leave others to do it for you. For instance, Erin O'Toole's slogan during his leadership campaign was Take Canada Back. This has invited predictable accusations of being a dog whistle to the darker forces in contemporary politics. Take Back X is a common political slogan and has been used across the spectrum. For instance, in the 2009 British Columbia provincial election, the BC NDP used Take Back Your BC as their slogan. Take Back is perfectly legitimate democratic rhetoric, and vigorous policing of our own rhetoric gives us the authority to decide for ourselves what is and isn't legitimate. Now, I don't recommend that O'Toole use it going forward. It certainly invites the kinds of attacks that the Liberals are eager to make, even if they are unfair. See, they're unfair, and there's nothing we can do about it. This is true Canadian conservatism. Conservative politicians and figures in Canada don't need to spend all day denouncing these people and offering themselves as flagellants for political opponents who need to also take a look at the problems in their own factions. Oh, yeah. Good luck for that to happen. But silence isn't enough either. Sometimes the strategy is to remain silent while using things like sane-washing or surrogates to offer the wink and nudge that keep the true believers in the flock without directly endorsing or shunning them. This isn't about imposing a strict litmus test on conservatism. Oh, no, of course not. It's not about excising minority but legitimate beliefs. It's not about saying you can't be a conservative if you're pro-life. Oh, thank you for that, Mr. Wolfenden. Or can't be a conservative if you're a protectionist. Well, that's exactly what Andrew Coyne and many others say every single day. It's about gatekeeping some basic sense of reality and not acknowledging unreality, and it goes on and on and on and on. It is incumbent upon serious and responsible people, Wolfenden concludes, that recognize these grievances as serious and recognize what is happening as portions of the right become increasingly untethered from reality to address this. And it has to start with not indulging demagogic lies and calling that reject the paranoid style of politics. My old friend Lauren Gunter, I see that he knows that the game is up. He has a column, in the Sun newspaper chain 2 days ago, America's constitutional democracy worked. Whew. I know it may not have looked that way this week when U.S. President Donald Trump whipped up his more ardent supporters to storm the Capitol building and kill a police officer in the process. On social media, someone with the handle Mrs. Socialista tweeted, "Can't today, I'm watching the season finale of the United States." Clever. For much of Wednesday, Washington, D.C. more nearly resembled some third world dictatorship in which the personality cult of the Generalissimo, personality cult, Barack Obama, no personality cult there. Hope, change, obey, obey. Do you remember that one? Remember that poster? It was a scene I certainly never thought I'd see in a modern Western democracy. And he just goes on and on. Oh, yes, comparisons to China, Zimbabwe, and Venezuela. Oh, Mike Pence nonetheless correctly explained that the Constitution gave him no such power and defied Trump. Bill Barr gets saluted, and the people who resigned, I guess this was before Schwarzenegger's comparison of what happened in Washington to the Kristallnacht. Yes, Schwarzenegger actually did that and was applauded for it. The clincher for me was that while Trump had lawyers who would make elaborate claims of widespread fraud outside courthouses, the legal teams who arranged his cases in court called few witnesses. None of these suits were heard, Lauren Gunter. They weren't heard. But never mind that. Lauren Gunter concludes, in the end, the craziness on Capitol Hill may have taken some of the craziness out of the campaign fallout because it demolished Trump's credibility. P.S. The safeguards that prevent a madman from launching a nuclear strike on his way out the door are at least as strong as the ones that defend U.S. democracy. What are the safeguards from, let's say, protecting how might we say non-compos mentis, like Sentinel man, from launching a nuclear strike on the way out? I haven't been hearing much about them recently. The columns by Ibbotson and Lauren Gunter are really not all that much different from Shri Pradkar, an old favorite of this live stream. I should mention that Shri Pradkar is born in India, and then after being schooled to university graduate level, she moved to Singapore for several years, and then she moved to Toronto, and now she has plenary power to discipline the Toronto Star newsroom, or at least its editorial operation, for not being sufficiently woke and diverse. She has a column January 6th, the tens of thousands of white people, boo, who rioted at the U.S. Capitol were reclaiming white supremacy. If white supremacy existed in the United States, how is it that there is official discrimination against white people, particularly white men in the United States? How could there be white supremacy if it is legal to discriminate against white people and there are quotas? There's disparate action. Oh, they failed their exam, but the wrong exam was biased. It's been rewritten half a dozen times. It's still biased. Why? Because not enough minorities were given jobs. Shri Pradkar writes, let it be remembered that it was white people, boo, who were allowed to breach the U.S. Capitol during a joint session of Congress. White people, boo, who broke the building's glass windows and rummaged senators' desks. White people, boo, who laid violent siege to the seat of American democracy. White people, boo, whose attacks led to Vice President Mike Pence being evacuated, and white people's violence that put the Senate and House chambers on lockdown. Tens of thousands of white people, armed white people, Confederate flag-waving, QAnon poster-bearing white people. White people are evil. That is the clear intent of this column, and we get this over and over again from Shri Pradkar, a woman who we graciously allowed into our country. But the memo clearly went out, and I'll have more to say about that later. You have heard me, no question, talk about the superiority of physical media to streaming. And I get called a boomer and worse for that. I think that I have been proved right. An episode of Community was dropped by Hulu. It's the famous Dungeons and Dragons, the first Dungeons and Dragons episode, where Senior Chang, played by the Korean actor Ken Jeong, decides to really get in the spirit of Dungeons and Dragons, and so he dresses up as an elf with the elf ears and a white wig and a black face, which is apparently just so grossly offensive that, of course, that whole episode must be removed. There are plans now, or it's being demanded, that Donald Trump be removed from the second Home Alone movie. And movies are routinely released by streaming services now and by broadcasters with terrible warning labels. And my advice has been, buy the physical media while you can. How about The Office? The Office, Netflix is what? Has lost The Office. There are many problematic racial things in The Office. Many, many, many. How can they be justified? Or actually, we're mocking Michael Scott here, but people might take pleasure in that mockery. Or they might decide that Michael Scott is actually a hero, despite being a blunderer. You can buy, last time I checked, on Amazon.com, the entire series run of The Office for $50 American. You do not need to rely on streaming services. You don't need to pay over and over again for the same thing. You buy it once, and it's yours. John Nolte writes in Breitbart, 13 Charles Bronson movies to watch before the left bans them. And this is no longer a joke. It's simply no longer a joke. That I am going to be reviewing Glenn Kenny's book Made Men about the making of the film, Scorsese's film Goodfellas. And there's a lot more. He talks about many other Scorsese films. Glenn Kenny is a smart man who knows a lot about film, and I've enjoyed his writing in the past, and I used to contribute semi-regularly to the comment section of his old blog, but he has gotten tremendously woke in the last few years. I suppose it's an instinct of self-preservation or mimesis. But reading this book, it dawned on me that Kenny seems to be more affronted by the casual racial prejudice of many of the characters in Goodfellas than he is by the fact that the protagonists are professional murderers. Yeah. We've got to, we've got to keep a hold of what's really important, because, we can't have people watching old movies where some guy puts on a dress, say, and it's considered amusing. I mean, that's hate speech. So it can't be permitted. Anran says J5 took down his Twitter account mighty fast last Thursday. Did he take it down himself, or was it taken down for him? I thought it said that his Twitter feed had been suspended. Okay. What else do we have here on the chat? Okay. KMG has reviewed many canceled flicks. Indeed, I have. Dan Harmon is pretty solidly, left-wing guy, or perhaps old-fashioned liberal guy. But no, he's not safe. I mean, no one is safe. I was talking last week, I believe, about the movie Grease and how grossly offensive it is. Why? Because of casual racism? No, because there's not enough black people in it. That's simple. It's that simple. Actually, I'm going to be reviewing a Don Siegel film coming up called Charlie Varick, which I rewatched the remastered version, which looks superb, a few days ago. And there's a lot of racial talk in this film, which was released in 1972. And despite the fact that the movie was directed by Don Siegel, who was Jewish, and it was written by Jews, there are anti-Jewish epithets in it, including one that made me laugh that I'd never heard before. But the point is that everyone talks like this. Shri Pradkar is a Hindu. She really, really doesn't like white people. But that is acceptable because apparently we live in a white supremacist state, despite the fact that both in Canada and the United States, discrimination against white people is legal and mandated. In fact, it is written into Canada's laughingly named Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Polygon says the Chinese must be laughing right now, thinking these people welcome us as liberators. Yeah, that there was a brave stand against what was going on in Hong Kong by several countries a few days ago. Not that they're going to restrict Chinese imports or stop the Chinese from buying up Canada. Say no. We can't have that. Paul Picasso 88 says, didn't Matthau and Siegel clash big time during the making of that movie? I was not aware of that. I will look into it. If Don Siegel had been French, everyone would be carrying on about him as an auteur. He really made so many great movies. Okay. What else do we have here? Jonathan Pohl, is Canada the U.S. as Bulgaria was to the USSR? Is it more like Mongolia or maybe Albania? Probably more like Albania. You know, Canada was always a consensus country. The United States began to go socialist far before Canada did. But Canada is an eternal rivalry with the United States. And when Canada turned hard left in the 1960s, first under Lester Pearson, who was a KGB agent, by the way, you could look it up, and Pierre Trudeau, who was a fellow traveler, the consensus was turned on its head. That everything that was Canadian was now anti-Canadian, and everything that was anti-Canadian was now Canadian. And if you didn't agree with the new Canada, which was created almost overnight, then you were not a patriot, probably a traitor. And since the time of Pearson and Trudeau, Canada has been reduced to, yapping at the United States that they're not liberal enough, even though whenever the United States gets a stupid idea, abortion, no restrictions on abortion federally, Canada decides, oh, no, we have to do that too. Women in the military, oh, we have to do that too. It could go all the way down the line. That America does something dumb and Canadians say, oh, no, come on, we got to do that too. We have to do that too. Hitler will be remembered as worse than Trump in the future history books. Did you mean to say that the other way around? Polygon says, hilarious, a nation that underwent communism for 80-ish years now looks more favorable than the U.S. Again, and from the same source, liberalism is a cancer that is far, far worse than even hardcore communism. Well, yeah, because it hollows out a society, as James Burnham wrote in Suicide of the West. Oh, we have civil rights in Canada. We have the best guarantee of civil rights of any country's constitution, Charter of Rights and Freedoms. How come it doesn't apply in Canada? Because there's an emergency, a medical emergency. Are you against science? It was that easy, was it? Disease, which has a survival rate of 99.95%. That is the emergency. We got people in my city walking around with masks outdoors, putting masks on their dogs. When last time I checked, 2 people in intensive care units on the entire island, which has about 800,000 people, and 11 people have died in almost a year. Wow, that's quite the emergency, isn't it? Yeah. You remember those halcyon days when they talked about flattening the curve and how we're going to have to suffer a little, but then we'll come out gloriously on the other side? Does anyone still believe that anymore? Jonathan Barr at Lockdown Skeptics. Boris Johnson held a cabinet meeting yesterday, and the report in Mail Online makes for alarming reading. Boris Johnson held a top-secret cabinet meeting to discuss an even tougher lockdown with limits on exercise, compulsory mask wearing outdoors, and no more social bubbles, all being floated by ministers, sources claim. The cabinet office refused to deny that draconian new laws were incoming and instead pointed to Matt Hancock's vague statement earlier today. The health secretary refused to speculate when directly asked if harsher measures, including curfews and nursery closures, might be brought in, and instead said Britons should follow the rules that we've got. One Whitehall source told Mail Online that the changes discussed today even included introducing a ban on people leaving their homes more than once a week. Yeah, and that's what British freedom means now. They used to call the rights of Englishmen. Again, neither Hitler nor Stalin would have dared to go so far as Boris Johnson and others have. When governments fail, they blame the governed. Clearly, their imaginative interpretation of lockdown restrictions is to blame for the high COVID death toll. Nothing to do with the lack of PPE, the failure to create dedicated hospitals for COVID patients, spunking tens of billions of pounds on a not fit for purpose test and trace program, building the Nightingales but not recruiting or training enough healthcare workers to staff them, decommissioning the Nightingales, failing to eliminate in-house infection, and the ongoing scandal of secondary transmission in care homes. No, it's all the fault of the disobedient general public. The irony is that the British public agrees with the government. According to Opinium, 72% of Britons think the authorities have not acted fast enough, and 64% say they want a government that quickly puts lockdown measures in place, even if it means that sometimes measures are put in place that didn't need to be, compared to 25% who want a government that tries the hardest they can to not put lockdown measures in place, even if it means sometimes decisions are made later than they otherwise would have been. What are they doing in Britain now? Harassing little boys throwing snowballs. Yeah, that's happened. Arresting a woman for sitting on a bench. Oh, don't panic, Chief Constable Mainwaring. And again, this is Jonathan Barr at Lockdown. Skeptics, like the rest of us, cabinet ministers are struggling to tell the difference between law and guidance. According to the Telegraph, police were right to fine two women £200 each for driving 5 miles from their home for a walk, Matt Hancock has said, as he warned the public to follow the rules because every flex can be fatal. As I pointed out, Christmas time, the Governor Whitmer of Michigan said that, the safest thing to do, the kindest thing to do is to, not visit your relatives or friends during Christmas. And again, leaving your house is dangerous. What can happen? I don't know. You could slip on some snow and smack your head. You could slip on some wet leaves and smack your head. You could fall walking up or down stairs. You could be attacked, robbed, assaulted, murdered. So perhaps no one should ever leave their house. But of course, houses are dangerous too. People slip in the bathtub, smack their head. They die. They trip on something like this long, ugly coaxial cable, and they smash their temple against the side of a table, and they die. So maybe people should be forced to wear bicycle helmets at all times. Priti Patel, the Home Secretary, today defended police as they began strict application of COVID rules that include £200 fines and less tolerance for rule breakers. Peter Hitchens tweets, "Call me old-fashioned, but there used to be a wise and firm rule that ministers did not in any way involve themselves in police operational matters. Abolished." Obviously, Matt Hancock absolutely backs police who find women walking in parks. The British public, I suppose what they used to call the lower classes, have become pretty bolshy in recent decades. Are they really going to put up with this? How many people need to, let's say, dissent from the lockdown? And apparently Britain is heading towards a near total lockdown. How many people need to dissent before the policy collapses? I shouldn't think it is all that many. And they're taking a terrible risk in Britain. Once again, I believe that they are in what historians or political scientists call a pre-revolutionary situation. The efficacy of the Pfizer vaccine. The supposed 95% effectiveness is based on 162 cases out of 22,000 receiving placebo with mild symptomatic COVID versus 8 cases out of 22,000 on active vaccine. And similar questions are being raised about the Moderna vaccine. Protect the NHS. Look, it was obvious when they rolled out that slogan almost a year ago that this was the start of tyranny, because of course this isn't my own idea. Many people thought of it before I did, that the NHS, the National Health Service, exists to protect Britons. It is there to serve Britons, not the other way around. Let's see, police arrest more than a dozen protesters at anti-lockdown march in London. Stop queue clampdown. Supermarkets are told to bring back limit on number of customers. And more of the same. Peter Hitchens, of course, is not at all happy with what is going on in Britain. And I don't know, am I surprised? Am I surprised by what is happening? I don't know. When Tony Blair decided to just run roughshod over British traditions, including turning the House of Lords into a holding pen for hacks, political hacks, when he destroyed the court system in Britain, came up with this farcical Supreme Court, when his government boasted privately, and it was revealed publicly, that the whole point of the enormous increase in third world immigration to Britain was to destroy the Conservative Party and mean that no right-wing government could ever be elected again. So no, I am not surprised by any of this. Hitchens writes in his Sunday column on the Mail on Sunday, what if the days did not, after all, start to grow longer after Christmas? Well, yes, of course they will, won't they? But I feel a dark, oppressive foreboding which makes spring seem very far away. Why is this? I sense that I and some others have now become the targets of a worrying wave of spite, censorship, and intolerance, very like the McCarthyite frenzy in 1950s America, which swept up all kinds of innocent people in what was claimed to be an attack on communism. The modern left love to claim that they are against that sort of thing, but only when they are not doing it themselves. There are three important groups here: the ones who snarl and point the finger, demanding that I should be an outcast, the ones who join in the mob, and the ones who are too scared to stand up against it. I see them all forming. I think they should all be ashamed of themselves. Some examples: a claim by a doctor that I and my allies have blood on our hands because we think lockdowns are a mistake. A person on social media who thought he was entitled to say that I was stirring up hatred against NHS staff, a baseless lie, and the many others who applauded and defended him when I stood up to this. The cartoonist in a supposedly anti-establishment magazine, would that be Private Eye, who last week portrayed mask opponents as the equivalents of football louts. The former senior BBC journalist Paul Mason, who tweeted that I was one of a group of fascist-enabling public figures on the same spectrum as full-blown science denial. Oh, they take away our rights. They talk about us being allowed to leave our houses one time a week, but no, we are the fascists, apparently. Funny how that works. Mason rejoiced that American tech giant YouTube had obliterated recordings of talk radio, a station which has, unlike the BBC, given generous platforms to opposition views. He said, quote, I was glad to see YouTube temporarily pull the plug on talk radio. I would be even gladder to see Ofcom, that is the media regulator in Britain, review the station's license to broadcast, and Twitter and Facebook label the claims of columnists as questionable or false where appropriate. But above all, I want to see politicians and public figures proactively and strongly refute COVID denialism, unquote. And again, he equated dissenters with fascists. Of course, these claims are going back and forth all the time. Hitchens says, he talks about his duty as a member of a free society. I've been given many gifts and old-fashioned schooling, which taught me how to think, not what to think. 4 decades in the University of Fleet Street with a front seat at many of the major events of our time, plus some detailed knowledge of how politicians and officials work. I've seen people die, heard bullets zip past, watched great states turn to dust, reported from more than 50 countries. I've published books about the colossal changes in Britain, which have happened in my lifetime. I've been incredibly fortunate, so I thought I had a special duty to speak out against something I thought was wrong. It was unpopular, but so what? Free speech usually is. I've done it before on smaller issues, but this time it is different. I am, for the first time in my life, deeply afraid for the future of freedom in my country. So should you be, concludes Peter Hitchens. And let's go back to the chat. Brandon Smith says, literally no one is coming to save anyone and never has. Self-reliance is what's being shunned. Can't have them figuring stuff out and doing something about it. Just convince them to wait their lives away. Adam 12 reruns. Is that what's showing now? I guess it could be. I don't know. A few years ago, this was a show that I sort of watched off and on when it was first broadcast, on the principle that you didn't watch TV because it was good. You watched something because it was on TV. And I learned that Jack Webb doesn't believe that citizens should defend themselves. He felt really strongly about that. Jack Webb was, of course, the creator of both Dragnet and Adam 12. And I saw an incredible episode where, it sounds like I'm making it up, but I'm not, where an owner of, I believe it was a gas station, he gets robbed at gunpoint. So he decides to buy a gun himself to protect himself. Oh, the police ask, can you describe, the perpetrator? And he says, well, one of those. And Martin Milner, who's really a dink in this series, one of those? What do you mean, one of those? Well, And so the guy comes back. And this time, the gas station owner gets pistol whipped. It turns out that it's a white man committing these robberies and has put blackface on. Yeah, that's right. So you can't even trust your eyes. Your eyes are racist. Ownership is underrated, says Brandon Smith. Absolutely right. Joe Schmo says, when the revolution comes, you will all have strawberries. Voice and crowd. What if I don't like strawberries? You will like strawberries. Yeah. The only thing that can save us is literally Christ, says Polygons. Well, that is my own belief. Jonathan Pohl says, I own almost nothing and I'm very unhappy about it. I own a few things. I have a stereo system, as it used to be called, and a Blu-ray player, a universal Blu-ray player, and I don't know, I believe over 1,000 Blu-rays and DVDs, but they've been in storage since April, so it is as if I do not have them. And I don't like the situation that I find myself in. Contra Q says, KMG, do you still think Trump will remain president after January 20th? Well, in accordance with YouTube decree, Joseph Robinette Biden Jr. will be inaugurated president of the United States on January the 20th, and it would be foolish of me to speak otherwise, because, of course, it's true. It's been fact-checked. Okay. Let's look at Alex Berenson. Oh, and of course, I can't do that, but just give me a second here. Okay. And coming up, it is such a delight to work with a computer which is not crippled by rubbish Wi-Fi. Berenson writes, January 10th, the riot Wednesday must be punished severely. We cannot tolerate attacks on the Capitol stirred by the president. And the media outlets yelling loudest about it went out of their way to ignore prolonged Black Lives Matter violence, including against federal buildings. Anybody else, Berenson writes, just a tiny bit nervous over the fact that Israel, which has vaccinated 20% of its citizens, far more than any other country, has a huge and growing wave of cases, or that it began about when the vaccines arrived? Correlation, causation, whatevs. No, just me then? Carry on. Oh, Jake Tapper had tweeted, one of the defining features of this era has been the most fragile of snowflakes, the brittlest of spirits masquerading as confrontational tough guys. Berenson comments, man who makes living preening before cameras calls other men snowflakes. CNN led the charge of people who profess to be shocked, outraged, heartbroken when Trump was going around calling the media the enemy of the people. Shouldn't a tough guy laugh that sort of thing off? Berenson writes, 9 days until Team Apocalypse takes full federal control. Flash poll, what's tops on the agenda? Vaccines in both arms, free masks for all, lockdowns forever, 50-cycle threshold. Lexiconin asked Berenson, are there any vaccines currently in use or development that could be considered safe and effective? For those of us who are not anti-vaccine but who have concerns about mRNA vaccines, Berenson answers, I will hold off on a hard answer as I've not done enough substantial research into the others, but my sense is yes. Live attenuated or dead viruses have been used in vaccines for many years. And even if the mRNA technology works, we should all worry about the lack of long-term safety data. And finally, from Berenson, let's be clear. Those cheery healthcare workers saying that you should be glad to feel awful after you get a dose or two of the mRNA vaccines because that negative response shows your body is making antibodies and protecting itself from SARS-CoV-2 are telling a barely half-truth. In reality, much of the fevers and other immune responses come as the body attacks the lipid envelope protecting the vaccine RNA, and that in no way helps prime your immune system to recognize the coronavirus. It is a side effect, pure and simple. What proportion of the side effects come from the body's response to the newly created coronavirus spikes? Good, at least theoretically. And what proportion from the lipids or other features of the vaccine molecule? Bad under any circumstance? We don't know. And why don't we know? Because at warp speed, there's no time for naughty questions like those. And if Moderna or Pfizer know, they aren't saying. Yeah. Really quite disturbing story from Breitbart by Dr. Susan Berry. A research professor at Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary took to Twitter Tuesday to blame pro-life Christians for the overflow of coronavirus patients in Los Angeles County hospitals. In her tweet, Karen Swallow Pryor, PhD, blamed pro-life Christians for the surge in COVID cases in Los Angeles. She wrote, LA hospitals are so overwhelmed by COVID patients, ambulances are being ordered to stop transporting patients to hospitals if they have virtually no chance of surviving. Yeah, pictures or it never happened. The culture of death we pro-life Christians warned about is here. We brought it. There was another story on Breitbart about the mayor of London called Sadiq Khan, demanding that all church services or all religious services in London be banned. We see how quickly COVID-19, once again, average age of death, at least in the province of Alberta, 82. The survival rate of 99.95% for those under 70 is been seized as an excuse to institute mandatory atheism. And what's worse is our ostensibly religious politicians, such as Premier Jason Kenney of Alberta, have no problem with this whatsoever. Worse still, Christian leaders, with some exceptions, typically in the evangelical community, are perfectly fine with this as well. I walked by St. Andrew's Cathedral in downtown Victoria a few hours ago, and there are signs on the big wooden doors out front saying no more masses. Because obviously Christians or Catholics, they don't need communion. I mean, why would they want that? I mean, shouldn't Zoom services be good enough for everyone? I mean, you know, aren't these people making a fetish of the wafer? I mean, Catholics believe, or they're supposed to believe, that this is actually the body of Jesus Christ. But I mean, how would that be efficacious? Clearly, you know, wearing a mask and observing social distancing and washing your hands 78 times a day is far more efficacious than the heavenly host. And I've seen very little resistance. I've seen very little resistance. You know, conservatives in Canada, again, don't call yourself a conservative. Conservatives are losers. Conservatives are worse than that. They cannot be trusted. But my response to Ben Wolfenden, here, we need more talk of true blue Canadian conservatism, balkanization, medico-bureaucratic tyranny, suppression of civil rights, physician-assisted murder, the sexual mutilation of adolescents, mandatory participation of leaders in pride parades, and worship of the state. Kevin Quinn, who follows me on Twitter and who is a Catholic, as I am, responded, I don't hear Canadian conservatives talking about any of that. They don't want to rock any boats or be divisive. They go along to get along, and they'll jail you for protesting as fast as any Liberal, NDP, or Green Party poll. Well, I pointed out to him, I don't want to disagree with him, but Canadian conservatives support everything in the list, which I just read out. They also support government-mandated discrimination against white males and the Supreme Court of Canada's ruling that truth is not a defense to accusations of hate speech. They're worse than useless. They are wholly destructive because, again, you have this hollowing out. It's like a pod person phenomenon, like Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Oh, I'm a true blue conservative. And you support the sexual mutilation of adolescents? You support that? Well, yes, of course. I'm not a transphobe or anything like that. So a 12-year-old girl who wakes up one day, watches some YouTube videos, talks to her friends, decides that she's actually a boy. You put that young woman on puberty blockers? Well, absolutely. I mean, that's what the science says. You know that these puberty blockers, they freeze these little girls physically and mentally at that state. Do you think that's a good idea? I could go, on and on about the reasons, but no, they're just terrified of being thought reactionary. Thomas Sowell wrote, back in the 1990s, that let's talk about a conservative movement was rather fatuous because, first off, you'd have to find things that they'd conserved, which is nothing. And going back to the 90s again, I used to write regularly about the government party, that we are ruled by the government party now. We may think we're ruled by Democrats or Republicans, liberal or conservative or labor, und so weiter. But no, they are, with few exceptions, members of the same party, the government party. And you know that the Republicans in the United States, certainly of the ilk of Mitch McConnell, are very pleased by these crackdowns on free speech, because these people hate being criticized. It is an intolerable wound to their amour propre. It is lèse-majesté, in fact, that how dare they criticize Mitch McConnell or Lindsey Graham or any of these people. They are our betters, and they must be protected from criticism of any kind, let alone abuse. This is from NBC Los Angeles. Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, defends California business climate. He pushed back Friday against criticisms that California is becoming unfriendly for business, pointing to all the new billionaires created by initial public offerings and noting that its richest people are doing pretty darn well. Well, the system works, doesn't it? What did we see last year? We saw the richest people in America get much, much, much more rich, which can only be a good thing. We found the richest people in America becoming much, much, much more powerful than they had been previously. And that has to be a good thing, right? Newsom's extended riff about the state's business climate came in response to questions about people moving out of California, including billionaires Elon Musk, the head of the electronic company Tesla, and Larry Ellison, the chief executive officer of software company Oracle. Musk recently moved to Texas, which has no income tax, though Tesla is still headquartered in California. Ellison moved to Hawaii and moved his company headquarters to Texas. Republicans have also criticized Newsom for government-mandated business closures aimed at slowing the spread of the coronavirus. Newsom noted that California isn't the cheapest place, but he said people are deliberately spreading, wait for it, misinformation about taxes in the state, though he gave no specifics. No. Misinformation has become a talisman. It is a magic word. Its use is proof that you are guilty. C'est tout. And what am I going to finally talk about? Oh, yeah, I was going to talk about the flight from White. I'll talk about that tomorrow because I've only got a few minutes left. You've been reading stories about sex robots because the media loves stories about sex robots. You have also been reading stories about various sorts of sexual devices becoming electronic and being connected to the internet, because as we all know, the internet is a really safe place. This is from Bleeping Computer by Ionut Elascu. Hacker used ransomware to lock victims in their IoT chastity belt. The source code for the Chastity Lock ransomware that targeted male users of a specific adult toy is now publicly available for research purposes. Users of the Bluetooth-controlled Qi Cellmate chastity device were targets of an attack with this malware last year after security researchers found a vulnerability in the toy that allowed locking it remotely. Qi Cellmate is a connected sex toy with a companion app to control its locking/unlocking via Bluetooth that's typically managed by someone else than the person wearing the device. In October 2020, researchers at Pen Test Partners published details about a serious vulnerability that allowed a remote attacker to take control of any Qi Cellmate device. They found that making a request to any API endpoint did not require authentication, and that using a 6-digit friend code would return a huge amount of information about that user, such as location, phone number, plain text, password. It wouldn't take an attacker more than a couple of days to exfiltrate the entire user database and use it for blackmail and phishing. Now, this device, I have a fairly good idea what it is, but it's disgusting, so I'm not going to be any more specific. Following the disclosure, an attacker started targeting Qi Cellmate mobile app users who controlled the smart toy and locked the chastity device. Victims were asked to pay 0.02 bitcoins, around $270 at the time of the attacks. The founder of the VXU Underground research group told Bleeping Computer that they published the source code for Chastity Lock ransomware after receiving it from someone who got it from the attacker. Soon after the attack started, a flood of complaints came from victim users reporting that they could no longer control the smart adult toy. Some of them fell victim to the attacker multiple times. Yeah, chastity belt. So what, you no longer have any access to what, let's say, your genitals? They are locked down. Of course, your genitals are used for purposes other than sex. And so imagine, oh my God, what's happened? What's happened? Oh my God, I've been taken control over by a hacker, and they want money, and I've lost my junk. Whew. Okay. And I paid him off. Oh my God, it's happened again. I don't know. I've mentioned my love of Tex Avery many times on the live stream. And of course, if you know his cartoons, MGM cartoons from the 1950s, it's about the world of tomorrow. And everything goes wrong. In these cartoons, one gets the impression that Avery has some sympathy for these robots, such like that are going berserk. But it is impossible for me to conjure up any sympathy, let alone empathy, for people who would shove various things into themselves and be locked out of their organs. And yes, of course, you'd want to make that open to the internet. You'd want to give someone else power over this, someone from a remote location. So, bad news stories all day today in my return to the live KMG show. But I thought that I would, end with a white pill, a good news story. And Steve says, lock me once, shame on you, lock me twice. Brandon Smith need a new reality show. Whose virus is it anyways? MCT says, when you're up to your ass in alligators, it's difficult to remember that your initial objective was to drain the swamp. KMG, a true comfort to see you back again. Blessings to all. Why, thank you. Too kind. Emmett Kelly Zer said, didn't Kennedy's people help Pearson defeat Diefenbaker? Yeah. There was a dispute over defense policy. Diefenbaker was something of a Canadian nationalist, which didn't sit well with Kennedy. Are you going to get to Roy Campbell, says Mary Crow? Yes, I am going to do that on Friday. And I was worried about my computer's camera, says Bob Paxson. Well, even there are two white lights here, which indicate my camera's in operation. And so, I unplug it and the white lights are off. I don't take any chances. I remove it from the top of the screen and put it on an external drive to my right, turn to face the wall. Chogogan 666, 3 iconic restaurants closed in New York City: the Jockey Club, the Heidelberg, Sammy's Romanian Steakhouse. That's 4. Okay. Oh, Papaya King. Papaya King. Oh, I know about that from Seinfeld. I don't know anything more about that. Again, let's talk about what is coming up on the show culture-wise. On Friday, a week delayed, I will be talking about Andrei Tarkovsky's 1972 science fiction film Solaris. A week after that, a very funny film, which I rewatched over the weekend. First film by Jake Kasdan, and to my mind, easily the best of his films from 1978, Zero Effect. A week after that, a exceedingly moving film about England, by Michael Powell and Emmerich Pressburger. They called themselves the Archers, from 1944, called A Canterbury Tale. A week after that, Fritz Lang's 1931 noir classic M. And a week after that, the aforementioned Charlie Varick from Don Siegel, 1973. On the book club, Roy Campbell. Let's see. No, it's not Hermione Lee's biography of Tom Stoppard is coming up next. A week after that, Roy Campbell's collected poetry. A week after that, Jim Bouton's hilarious memoir about baseball, Ball 4. A week after that, a book which I mentioned during the live stream, Made Men by Glenn Kenny. And a week after that, some of Nick Kent's collected stories, rock journalism, called Apathy for the Devil. So I will be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. If you like the show or any part of it, or if you like the Flintstones in the background, I think that's what that is. If you like the show or any part of it, I'd appreciate it if you click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not done so already. Palpicasso88 says flawless audio and video today. I'm so pleased about that, because I could moan and whine about everything that happened last week, but the story has a happy ending. If you'd like to donate to this live stream, very much appreciated at all times, but especially at this time of my own personal flux and mutability. My PayPal account is linked to Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. Once again, Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. If you're Canadian, donations to this live stream can be sent directly via Interac at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And in these times of social atomization, civilizational collapse, and even worse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear listeners and viewers, managed to form a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.